everyone, and welcome to the Ascend podcast. I'm Ann Greeny, and today I'm talking to Carol Carpenter. Carol is the current Chief Marketing Officer at Unity and has an incredible background at scaling some of the world's biggest technology brands. Prior to Unity, Carol served as Chief Marketing Officer at VMware, Google Cloud, ClearSlide, and others. In addition, she stepped in to become the CEO of Elasticbox, which she helped get sold to Lumen Technologies. Please enjoy my conversation with the incredible Carol Carpenter.
Carol, thank you so much for joining us today.
So great to be here. Thanks, Anne, for inviting me.
So I wanted to start with, earlier in your career, one of your first roles was right out of Stanford. You joined Apple in the mid-90s in one of the most turbulent times in the company. What led to that role and to getting into technology straight out of school? And really, what did you learn?
So I joined after business school, in fact, and at HBS, there was a technology club, and there were only two companies who came to campus to recruit. It was actually Intel and Microsoft. I mean, can you even imagine today? I mean, it's such an inversion of that. And I was very set on working in tech primarily, and not just Apple. It was technology in general. Because when I looked around at all the traditional roles that, an MBA might take, they're in banking, they're in consulting. And when I looked at the leadership of those organizations and the path, it just looked way too traditional for me. And it looked like, yes, it looked like less of a meritocracy. And so I thought, hey, tech is this new field. There are not a lot of women yet. We're going to change that. And hopefully it's going to be more of a meritocracy because it is just very bottoms up. At least it used to be. And I think in many companies it still is. And anyway, I reached out to a few companies, and, the old days of like sending a resume, like going through a process, and Apple was one of them. And of course, while I think from a market perspective, Apple was, I still remember the headlines, rotten at its core, like it was the tumultuous times. To someone coming out of school, it looks still like this amazing company with great customer experience where I could learn a lot. And so I fell in love with the people, in particular, the woman who was leading the group. And I think that's one of all of us who have been around a little bit. We've learned that who you work for matters tremendously. And I went to Apple, and I got to tell you, like, for someone who's kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, it was an amazing place to learn.
And you were a PM at Apple, and then you eventually pivoted over to the marketing world after that. What led to that pivot?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think Apple still does this. So Apple doesn't differentiate between product managers and product marketing managers. They actually believe, at least then, that it's super important that if you can't understand the product, you have zero chance of being able to market it effectively. And all the things that go into product marketing, positioning, pricing, packaging, routes to market, you can't effectively do that if you don't understand the products. And I think when I think back upon that time, so much of the Apple ethos is about the customer experience, which everyone uses that term lightly now, but in the 90s, mid-90s, it wasn't as highly valued or understood. And I really believe that's a key to their success and other companies who embrace customer experience. So that idea that if you don't understand what the processor is doing, what the actual software is even doing, how can you talk about the beautiful benefits it can bring? And I hold that very near and dear. And that's one of the things I work really hard with my teams and myself, is to make sure that we understand how do the products work. It doesn't mean we're experts, but that we really try to understand. I have to say and admit, like, not being an engineer by any kind of training, it was hard. It was really hard. I still remember calling up a friend who was an electrical engineer from my undergrad days and saying, I need software 101 lessons and hardware 101 lessons. what is LIFO and FIFO when it comes to processors? And what does it mean to have like, command line? I mean, really basic questions. That's another thing I try to tell my kids and others who ask me for advice is like, ask all those dumb questions early. Ask them early, get them out there and keep asking them, because that's the only way you learn, right? So anyway, I'm very grateful to those friends who kind of taught me the basics, so to speak.
I remember when I made the pivot into technology originally from the entertainment space, and I sat in a meeting and it was like acronym soup of all these. I had no idea what was going on. And people kind of, in technology, we have all these different acronyms for stuff. And sometimes it's hard for those that are new transitioning in. And it's actually made me cognizant of trying to make sure that I explain what we're actually saying, as opposed to just throwing a bunch of acronyms out at people, and being a little inclusive in those conversations.
I still remember I did a summer internship at Microsoft, and side note, I worked for Melinda French, now Melinda Gates, no longer Melinda Gates, but and what a learning experience that was that summer. But she had a joke. She said, yes, we are going to use a language that is a little bit arcane. It's called English in our marketing. Say it as plainly and simply and clearly as possible. Yes.
Absolutely. And so in your roles leading marketing, what did you love about that role that got you to like stick as that CMO?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have done a few other things along the way. And there was one point I thought, I want to be CEO. But on the marketing front, I think there's, and again, this comes from the way that Apple trains marketers, and right or wrong, you are a product and go-to-market owner, which is the full end-to-end. It's not that you are just the messaging person or just the pricing person. You're responsible for the end-to-end soup to nuts of making sure that what we bring to market fills a customer need, and not just fills, delights the customer. And I think that's a really important, it's obviously important. It's look how many companies have had amazing technology, but they're littered up and down 101 in the Bay Area, right? They didn't make it because the tech was great, but they didn't have a great go-to-market. And that's why marketing as a profession is something I feel very strongly about. I believe that you need the great tech, which is, kind of the core of the value proposition, but then you need all the things that marketing does to help customers understand and benefit from the value. So it's that combination. And that's what I love about marketing as a profession.
And you actually, as you alluded to, you took an interesting role partway through your career and ended up as a CEO of a fairly early stage startup. And that was how your kind of relationship with Sierra started. What led to that decision to becoming a CEO of a fairly early stage company, and then, which did eventually exit? Like, how did you get into that role?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So I had spent over 7 years at a cybersecurity company, and it is a great company, great culture, female CEO leader, lots of great things, made lots of lifelong friends from it. And at a certain point, I didn't have new ideas for how to grow that business. So long story short, I said, okay, I live in Silicon Valley. And I still remember I had breakfast with Reid Hoffman at Town and Country. And he said, you got to participate. And I said, I'm participating? What are you talking about? I'm participating. And he's like, no, you're in this like cauldron of innovation, and you've been at this company so long, like you got to participate. So anyway, he may not realize it, but that was the genesis of me thinking, okay, maybe I should do something new. So anyway, I went to a startup that did not go so well. And and 2 years into that, I did that for 2 years. And then there was a change in leadership and I exited, and I was sitting with a friend and I said, I still think I have the juice and passion for that early stage company, but I don't want to work for a first-time CEO again. And we were talking about it, and he's like, well, why can't you be the CEO? And I'm like, no, and this speaks to the advice I'm sure you've heard. I've given it, but obviously I didn't take it at the time, is don't limit yourself. And I said, no, I've never been a CEO. I've never done it. Yeah, I was a GM, but I can't do it. I don't know anything about fundraising or building a company. And he's like, well, you just told me all the things you think went wrong. It seems like you've got some of the battle scars. Why don't, and he actually challenged me. He said, here's a thought experiment. Whatever your financial runway is that you can go without a job. Okay, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, just tell yourself, I'm only going to look and interview and talk to people about CEO roles for X months. I think it was 6 months. And I said, okay, I'll give it, I'll try it. But, recruiters are going to laugh at me and no one's going to take me seriously. Well, it's like so tried and true that we underestimate ourselves as women often. Literally, I had like 2 conversations with recruiters. And I said, well, actually, I know you're calling me for a CMO role, but I'm frankly interested in CEO roles. And no one even questioned me. No one said, well, I don't think that's, and they all said, well, I actually have a few things you should look at. And then I was talking to another friend who was a VC who said, oh yeah, I have a company. And this, and I blame and credit Mark at Sierra for helping me understand that, yeah, I could be a good fit for an early stage startup company. And that what they needed was leadership, and leadership in terms of decision-making, culture building, and finding product market fit, as so many companies. So anyway, yeah, that was the story of how I just took off my own blinders and went for it. And I think I was in I don't know how old I was, but I was at a point, I was like, yeah, why not? And I think it was actually Mark who said to me, oh, come on, Carol, what's the downside? I love how VCs frame things this way. He said, what's the downside? The worst case is you don't find product market fit to be able to accelerate the revenue, but the technology is rock solid and you end up selling to another company. So, amazing experience, understanding how to run a board, how to manage a board, how to hire, how to fire at a smaller scale, not just a larger company, and how to build a culture and build a go-to-market and not be afraid to, we tried new things pretty consistently, just iterating, right? Until you find the right pitch, the right messaging, the right way to talk about and show the product, the right way to break in. Really amazing learning experience.
And for those, there's so many first-time founders that are also just new to leadership in general. Do you have any advice for them as they're starting to build not only their companies, but now having to build teams and culture, as you mentioned, and go-to-market strategies? What advice do you give those early stage founders?
Well, so what I did, and I was a first-time CEO, not an early stage founder, but I think it applies to both, is I built my own kitchen cabinet. And my kitchen cabinet was 4, but then it really became 3. First time, other people had been first-time CEOs. And basically, this is pre-COVID, of course, many, many years ago. And I said, hey, I will buy you dinner once a quarter. Please, as my friends, I need a place, a venue to be able to ask my dumb questions and to try out ideas and get your advice. And so it was a safe place. Like, you really, as CEO, everyone says it's such a lonely job. And even at, 40, 50 people, it's a very lonely job. You really can't talk to your employees about your worries about runway, about product market fit, about a customer issue, about people inside. And you really don't want to talk to your board about it. Although if you're lucky, you have some good relationships, you could talk about some of it, but having a place where you can just put it all out there and really talk about like, hey, what did you do when you saw this kind of behavior with your sales leader? Hey, what did you do when you have customers who are dragging out the purchasing process, which that happens a lot, right? It was invaluable. So yes, I'm grateful to those people. You can tell there's a theme here, which is I'm not afraid to ask for help.
No, and I think it's crucial, especially at the early stage. One of the things we hear over and over again with early stage founders is you don't know what you don't know. And when you're building in the early stage, it's how do you surface those gaps before they become real problems? And it makes a lot of sense that just having those conversations with people who have been on the battlefield and been in the trenches and done those same had those similar experiences really does seem to help in that process.
Yeah, and I would also just to add, if you don't mind, is so the founder of Elastic Box is an incredibly smart, savvy, brilliant thinker. And I don't, not just technologist, thinker. And what I think made our relationship work so well is that we did not bring the same perspective. And so I would say to an early stage founder is like, find somebody who thinks differently from you, which is not our natural instinct as people. We like people who are like ourselves, and find somebody who is very different from you. And I have to say, at first I was like, it gave me a little pause because we did think so differently. But he's a near and dear friend. We built a strong friendship, a strong working relationship. And much of it's because we just came at everything from a different perspective. And then what came from that, whether it was about, okay, should we position ourselves more like Docker? Remember Docker back then? Should we, should we be embracing Kubernetes more, an open source strategy more strongly? And we both would bring a different perspective. And I think our ultimate decisions were always better because of that.
And so Elasticbox being the company that you became CEO at, just so everyone knows, and then talk a little bit about that handoff, because I think that's a really challenging thing for founders. Some never have to go through it and can lead their companies from inception to the late stage, but it is common where some people are just early stage, great at early stage operation or great at great technologists, and then do need that level of support later. And so how did that handoff? How did you, obviously coming at it from different angles helps, but that can also be challenging. How did the two of you work together to try to make that a seamless transition?
Well, I give him a tremendous amount of credit for just being open and vulnerable and acknowledging that what had been happening, the way the company had been operating, was not successful. So I think the fact that there had been problems with product market fit, there was helpful, because it's almost like, if things are going really well, I don't think an early stage founder is going to say, gosh, I should hand over the reins, right? So I think that was obviously a factor. The other piece is we both came at it very openly. I still remember sitting in a conference room with him, and he was explaining, the technology and the customers and what had happened. And I said, for this to work, we are going to have to trust each other. And what that means is, and we actually talked about, like, what does that mean? Because trust is an overused and misunderstood term. Like, yeah, I trust somebody that they're not going to throw me in front of a car. Okay, that's not saying much. But the trust of, like, we're going to openly communicate, we're going to be fully transparent, we're going to approach this as a partnership. So that's, even though I have the title CEO, we were going to approach this as a partnership. He was still on the board for sure. And it was very clear he was, the heart and soul of the company, but that from a business lens and a customer lens, we needed other things. So I think that helped a lot. And then frankly, I spent not, 90 days, which is what people always say, don't do anything for 90 days in a small company. You can't wait that long. But I spent the first few weeks listening, asking questions, really working hard not to bring bias and prejudgment to any situation. And I think that paid off. And I mean, we talked every day. We talked multiple times a day. It was, I don't know, it's one of the most transparent relationships I've had in my life, to be sure.
That's fascinating. And after you left that CEO role, you've had just a tremendous career, again, leading some of the biggest companies as the CMO and marketing leader. You were at Google as their VP of marketing, you were at VMware as their CMO, and now you're at Unity as their CMO. What element do you love when you come into a new company as a leader in the C-suite? What piece of it, what do you love to just jump right in and do? What's that favorite thing to do once you sign the contract and are all of a sudden you've got this team to manage and run?
So the very first thing I like to do and focus on, of course, there's, I did a listening tour longer than a few weeks in all those situations. I call it dissecting the value stack. And what I mean is like stripping away, regardless of size of company, everything you read and see and getting to what is the core value. And it's defined, value is defined as functional, economic, and emotional. And understanding as a company, and obviously some of these companies have multiple products, but what do customers really value? And value is perceived, right? It's not real. It's all perceived. So the value of a Tesla or a Birkin bag, or, it's much of it's perceived. And what is our value stack? What do customers care about? And how do we want to communicate that? So I think that's like the essential glue for building all the various marketing functions and programs, and it basically helps to define your go-to-market. The other piece is obviously the people. Like I learned pretty early, especially once I had children, that I was not going to scale as an individual or as a leader. Like I'm never going to be the person who works the longest or the hardest or be the smartest in the room. So the team, how do I bring together where do we have gaps? Where can we strengthen? Where do we need to do more education and up level? But assessing the team and making sure, like, having a kick-ass team of other marketing folks and business folks around me who can help lift everything we're doing. So those are the two big things I look for. It's interesting because at Unity, the CEO is a sales and marketing person, which is the first time I have worked for a CEO who is not a technologist. Now, he has deep curiosity about all the technologies and what's going on in the market, and can go very deep because he's self-taught and curious and smart, but he's not a technologist by nature. And it has been delightful in the sense of, now here's a case where we probably think a little more alike, although he is just far deeper in this domain around real-time 3D. But he and I can have interesting debates and ideas and brainstorms around the marketing, the positioning, the value creation, and how we're going to build our stack and where we need to invest. That it's really good to have.
And so similar to when you went into Elasticbox and you were working with the founder as the new CEO, now at a bigger company like Unity, where you're coming in and working with the CEO, how do you build trust coming in? I guess not only with the CEO, but also with this team that you inherit. Like, how do you build trust amongst them as the new one of the new leaders in the org?
Yeah, I think it takes time. It definitely takes time. And, part of it is being thoughtful and listening. The other part of this, and this is not something I've made up, but I try to think about what our customers, in our case, developers, we have an amazing developer community. And like I always tell the marketers, there are three ways to gain credibility or trust in a tech company. One is you can have deep customer knowledge. And therefore, which everyone should try to have, by the way, if you're in marketing or sales, any go-to-market function, which is, I understand this customer better than anyone else. I'm deeply immersed in it. I read about it. I go to the community meetups. I expose myself as much as possible to that group of customers or prospects. Two is you could be a deep technical person too, which, in tech companies, often you see people moving from the engineering side to product marketing. Like you see that flow go back and forth. A little bit harder to go the other way, but you do see that happening. And there are definitely products like at Google Cloud that were very technical, and we specifically hired product marketers who could really go deep into, data warehouses or AI and machine learning, for example. And then the third way is understanding an industry really, really well. And all three are amazing. I think that if you're a marketer and you can do all three, you're just golden. Generally, for me, because I haven't been the technical expert and I don't have an engineering degree, I work really hard on the other two, which is industry knowledge and customer knowledge. And so that's where I spent my initial time here at Unity, and where I have at other places, which is telling the head of sales, hey, I'd really like to join you on some customer meetings. Or in our case, we have an advocacy team. Hey, advocacy team, I really want to spend some time with you at some of these meetups. And that's where now, of course, during COVID, it was a little bit harder. It was all virtual, but it still can be done.
Yeah. And it seems like coming in, especially to when you come in from, VMware to Unity, totally different products, totally different, even, the consumers are different. The ICP is different. You've got to really show that you understand it to be the leader, and especially in marketing.
That's right. That's right. I just want to clarify. We do have, so here's where the overlap is very clear, which is we have an industry business, which is our B2B real-time 3D business for digital twins. So we have many companies like, Mercedes, Vancouver Airport, LG, et cetera, who are using Unity to build digital twins. And it's a more traditional B2B enterprise motion. The game side is we're selling to other game studios, developers and game studios. And so it's B2B, but you're right. It is not the CIO or CTO like it is in industry or at VMware or at Google Cloud.
And so I want to pivot a little bit and talk about just, as your role, marketing is changing rapidly. Technology is changing at lightning speed these days. How do you adopt for change, and how do you personally stay current with all the industry trends, and how do you inspire your team to also do that as well and stay ahead of the curve?
Well, okay, there's one thing I try to do, which is I'm an avid reader and consuminator of information. My team knows I probably read, like, I'm a micro learner, if that makes sense. I hope I'm not a micromanager. And I've always been an avid reader, and it means everything from reading PDC product development documents internally to, we have a tremendous number of Slack channels like most tech companies. And I I quietly read a lot of those just to see, oh, what's happening over here in Weta Tools with professional artists and what's the latest. And I also read pretty broadly beyond our internal sites. So I think just be an avid, curious person. That's one way. And then, I think this goes for many of us. We follow each other, right? As CMOs, we follow each other, we know each other, and we're always like, what's the latest in ABM? What have you been doing in account-based marketing that I should know? Or, how are you using AI? Big topic right now. How are you using AI to make your teams better? And then in terms of, how do we share and how do we motivate our teams? I try with my leads, and I have to think about how to do this in a more scaled way. With my leads, I share articles, I share I try to filter through and share the most salient, provocative pieces. And right now, I'll use AI as an example. As a team, we're all learning, like everyone is. We're all experimenting with Gen AI, and so we're cross-sharing and asking our team. Like, frankly, I was in Asia at the end of May, and I was at a town hall, and it was astounding. Like, there was an AI club, and I was so delighted because they showed me what they've been working on. It's like, wow. And I shared it back, and it's making sure that people know you are open and approachable, and then likewise doing some curation and pushing out and promoting best practice sharing.
On the topic of generative AI, how do you perceive that transformation to the marketing landscape? Are you guys, or can you say if you're, leveraging any of those tools today or plan to, or are there components of it that you're just excited about for the future?
I'm super excited about generative AI and AI more broadly. I do think it's changing. It's changing how we work. And I'll give you a few examples. So in particular, generative AI related to content is where the value is. And if you think about it, so much of what marketing, our output is content, right? Whether it's a blog, a landing page, a campaign, a video, like it's content that we're producing, white papers, et cetera. We have been experimenting primarily with the first draft. Like, how do you put in a prompt? How do you drive, like, give me a first draft of a landing page. And so we've been using Jasper.ai for our landing pages. The team's been experimenting. It's pretty darn good. We have our large user event, our annual user event coming in November in Amsterdam. It's called Unite. And the team wrote the first draft of the invitation emails, the announcement emails using Gen AI. It was pretty good. Now, of course, it all seems to, needs a little tweaking, and it's only as good as the prompt, but we're getting better at it. And I think we are going to continue to be able to do more with less. We're going to continue to just get better. And in particular, the other area where it helps a lot is we are a global company. We operate in, I can't remember, more than 20 countries easily, and localization. Everything, and not just the product or the documentation. I mean, our campaigns, our blog posts, we have our website, and every company I've been at, we spend quite a bit of money on localization. Now, the part where I have yet to see AI do a really good job is on the culturalization piece, which is, really capturing the nuances of what's happening in that culture, not just a straight translation. But I think we're going to get there. I think it's going to get better and better. I tell my team all the time, it's not AI versus creativity. It's AI plus creativity. And it's just given us a boost. It has totally given us a boost.
So one thing that comes up a lot, and I'll kind of lean into the what you were just saying about Gen AI and how important it is and how fast things are moving, is around hiring. And so for when you're building out your team or you're hiring and complementing your team, how do you find team members, or do you have any tricks to find team members that are the ones that get really excited about seeing what's, around the curve and trying out these new technologies? Any tips for founders, especially because it matters so much at the early stage as well, for finding the right people that can help your company grow?
Yeah, yes. And I'm a big believer that it's the behaviors that you're interviewing for, not so much, I've used this line a lot with my team here and other places, but really trying to identify, is somebody, are they a great jockey or are they on a great horse? And I think we conflate the two, like, oh, that person was at X company. Oh, they must be really great. Well, not necessarily, right? Because sometimes they're on a great horse. And frankly, if I were in an early stage company, I would be looking for people who have failed. And by fail, I don't mean like outright failed. It could be that they didn't have the big IPO that everybody wants, but that they've tried a lot of things. And, we don't learn so much when we succeed. We learn a lot when we fail. Failure is an amazing teacher, as we know. And I look for those behaviors. So asking hard questions like, the whole TED, tell, explain, describe. TED, tell me about a time when you used AI in a marketing campaign. Describe how you think about generative AI and explain to me some ideas that you've generated, like, get those specifics. And that's how I was taught to interview. I think actually it came from Apple days. And I'm still an advocate. You can tell I'm still sticking to a lot of those learnings, but I have found that to be the best predictor of future success.
That's super helpful, I think, for all founders. And I think that's demystifying how to find those, the next leaders in their company, and the ones that really are going to take the risks, but take the right risks, and lean into the technologies that are available. So, Carol, this has been amazing. I just wanted to end on one thing. You mentioned how you're an avid reader and clearly consuming in all ways, shapes, and forms. For the emerging leaders that are out there, is there a book or, resource that you recommend that they read or try to consume to really get to sharpen their spear?
Yeah, well, there are a few. One is they should listen to your podcast if they're on the marketing side. So let's put that out there. Two, there's a book called is it called Shot Caller or Calling Your Shots, which talks about the value stack. It talks about the go-to-market. It talks about, how do we reduce kabuki dancing and how do we get to the heart of the value, which I think is a really, really good read. I still think books on leadership that I still go back to, there's the five dysfunctions of teams. I still go back to that. And how do you build trust, to your point? How do you build trust, which leads to higher performance? Ultimately, that's what you want, is the high performing teams. And then in terms of podcasts, and I actually think listening to podcasts and reading outside of your domain is what generates the most ideas. Like, I'll give you an example. Like I listen to, This American Life. I listen to like How I Built This, which I think is fascinating. And I always love it. They're early builders of, like, I don't know if you listened to the one about making kombucha and how, she was making kombucha in her apartment until the kombucha was like overtaking the place. And just like that hustle, that grit, boy, it's inspirational because it reminds me and helps me remind my teams, like, hey, there are easier ways to do things, and that we can't get caught up in the process or the bureaucracy so much as the output and the outcomes. I mean, that's the challenge sometimes when you do get larger, is the focus shifts from the customer and the deliverables to oh, the procurement process, and we do it to ourselves. It's the price of success. And how do we strip away what's not needed? And I have to just bring that back to the team and to myself a lot.
I think that's so helpful, especially for founders of all stages. So, Carol, thank you again so much for taking the time today. If people want to follow you or follow Unity, what's the best way to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. Unity's on LinkedIn. Sign up for our newsletters. Happy to chat with anyone. I'm also on Twitter, but not as active always.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Carol, so much for your time. And thank you all for listening.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Anne. Bye-bye.